Our host, Michael Bannock, with whip in hand, is on a quest to discover the saints through the centuries. He painstakingly searches high and low, but where could they be? Surely man's system of government will help our studious host find the answers. Oftentimes, clues can be found right under our nose. Rather expeditiously, he realizes that man's conspiracies are a door that is better left unopened. Michael, in desperation, consulted some of the locals. Sadly, this was not as advantageous as he would have hoped. Perhaps the institutions of higher learning hold the key to unearthing these secrets. Quickly, he finds himself entrenched in the annals of history. Astonishingly, Bannock finds direction in the most unlikely of places. Has he done it? Could it be this obvious? Sadly, man's machinations run deeper than once thought. Will he ever find the truth? Join our fedora-wearing host, Michael Midwest Bannock, on his search to find the true believers on this explosive episode of The Saints Through the Centuries.
Welcome to YRM's special series on Saints Through the Centuries. I'm Michael Bannock of Yahweh's Restoration Ministry, Holt Summit, Missouri. And today's broadcast is entitled, When Saints Entered Babylon. And we start with Segment A, the Babylonian Connection. In Revelation 18:4, the holy people are warned of Babylon. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. In this segment, we will learn who is Babylon, what is Babylon, where is Babylon, how Babylon survived to this age, and what influence Babylon has enjoyed through history. Here is a step-by-step overview of what we found. 1. The story of Babylon begins with the golden head of Nebuchadnezzar's statue, the one in his dream. We'll see that in a bit. Babylon continued through the two arms of the Medo-Persian Empire. Step 3, Alexander's Greek Empire inherited Babylon. Step 4, Babylon continued in the Ptolemaic and Seleucid empires spun off from Alexander's empire. In Step 5, Rome absorbed the Ptolemaic and Seleucid empires and developed an eastern and western sphere of influence. In Step 6, Rome fell in the east and west to invaders who inherit in each generation Rome's presence, and thus Babylon. This included both political entities and Christendom. Here is why this is important. It is the Roman era in which the Messianic faith is catapulted into the world. And it is this stage, in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, where Revelation warns us to come out of her, my people. Unlike all prior ages, from this point forward, we are sternly warned to avoid this system. Now here are the details. See if you too can see the handoff of Babylon's heritage from one empire to the next. Number 1, of course, Babylon was Babylon. And the heir of Babylon was naturally the two arms of the Medo-Persian Empire. Next, Cyrus, king of Persia, was known in Babylonian legal documents as Kurash, the king of Babylon. Indeed, Persia inherited Babylon. In event number 3, the next heir of Babylon was the Grecian Macedonian Empire under Alexander, represented by the belly of brass in Nebuchadnezzar's dream statue. It is not well known, but Alexander sought to make his capitals in both Alexandria and in Babylon. He is illustrated here, entering Babylon. Furthermore, he died in Babylon and was buried in Alexandria. Event number 4. At a meeting in Babylon called, quote, the Partition of Babylon, Alexander's empire was carved into a cluster of spin-off empires. 2 of those empires are represented by the thighs of brass in Nebuchadnezzar's dream statue: the Ptolemaic Empire in the west and the Seleucid Empire in the east. In the west, the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt naturally had its capital at Alexandria, but in the east, when the Babylon city collapsed, its inhabitants were moved to Seleucia, the capital of Seleucus's empire, about 55 miles from Babylon. Now, control of Israel bounced between the 2 kingdoms several times, with the Seleucids ultimately prevailing. In Event 5, Rome seized control of Israel while vanquishing both Ptolemaic and Seleucid kingdoms. This is where Cleopatra came in, but that's another story. Israel is now under the influence of both the Greek culture, for example by language, and the Roman culture. Now with Babylon forgotten, Rome, the heir to the Greek Empire, continues to grow in both the West and in the Hellenistic East. In this age, the Messianic faith emerges. In 330 AD, the Roman Empire, officially Catholic, formally recognizes 2 cultures and 2 capitals: the eastern capital at Constantinople and Rome, continuing in the west. Now, Rome ultimately falls, yet Europe stays Roman. In 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire falls when a Germanic Christian barbarian named Odoacer seizes Rome. Odoacer considers himself a client of the Eastern Roman Empire and rules until 483 AD. From about 481 AD forward, Europe stumbles through countless emerging and competing kingdoms, each of them led by a Christian or Catholic, endorsed by the Pope, and always laying claim to the Roman tradition. Now here are some of the high points in the succession of Romish empires in the West. First, there was the Merovingian kingdom under Clovis and others, from 481 to 751 AD. Next was the Carolingian Empire under Pepin the Short and others, from 800 to 887 AD. Then there was the Holy Roman Empire under Charlemagne and others, running from about 888 to 1806 AD. The infighting and rivalries among states within Europe was unrelenting. Even after the Holy Roman Empire fell, Western Christianity still exerted enormous influence on world governments. Question: how could anyone honestly claim that this violent, chaotic world was the kingdom of Yahshua? Yet these all claim to be Christian kingdoms. Another question: how did the saints wind up in the middle of all this? We intend to find out. Let us press on. After centuries of its own violence, conquest, and intrigue, the Eastern Roman Empire also falls, yet it continues to live. Constantinople lasts until 1453, and its Islamic conqueror considers his kingdom to be Roman. For example, the Islamic Ottoman conqueror Mehmed even proclaimed himself Kaiseri Rum, that is, Caesar of Rome. By this time, the Eastern Orthodox faith practiced in Russia, because it was planted there by Eastern Empire Christians, gave birth to the idea of Moscow as a third Rome, and that idea continues to this day. Look it up. Let's summarize the story of Babylon's continued existence. Medo-Persia was the heir of Babylon. Alexander's empire inherited Medo-Persia. Alexander's 4 generals divided up his kingdom. Ptolemy and Seleucus tussled over Israel. Seleucus wins. Rome absorbed the Ptolemaic and Seleucid empires. and this is the time of Yahshua and the apostles. Continuing, Rome falls in the west to Christian conquerors who claim in each generation Rome's heritage. And the Eastern Roman Empire in Constantinople also falls to invaders, who also claim to have Rome's heritage. And finally, the world order we have inherited is directly descended from this milieu of competing descendants of Rome. In other words, the Roman Empire inherited Babylon. This is supported by Nebuchadnezzar's image and a candid assessment of history. These two legs are Eastern and Western Rome. We cannot overemphasize the significance that when the Roman Empire split, as shown in the image as two legs, they self-identified as Christian. Ultimately, Christendom inherited the Roman Empire. We recommend this YouTube video featuring historian Mary Beard, who explains further how Christendom inherited Rome. Look for the video entitled, "Why Did the Roman Empire Collapse?" with Mary Beard. So what is the status of Babylon today? In antiquity, everyone laid claim to Babylon's heritage. Later, they were anxious to claim Roman heritage. It's the same thing in the eyes of heaven. These empires are characterized by a ghastly level of infighting, false and or corrupted religion, unrestrained military conquest, lavish wealth generated on the backs of the weak, and persecution of the holy people. Despite biblical warnings to avoid this ancient system, worldwide Christendom wrapped their arms around it. Many saints in antiquity presumed to compromise and partnered with Babylon. After a little break, we will zero in on the time when saints entered Babylon. After the following announcements, we'll return and trace the historical pressures which pulled the saints of antiquity into this Babylonian chaos.
Hoi ha'omerim, l'ra tov, wela tov ra.
To those who call
Samim,
evil good and
Choseh,
good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. It has been said the truth is oftentimes stranger than fiction. Visit our website, yrm.org. Download our mobile app for Apple or Android. Simply search YRM.
You know, friends, when we decide to embrace the truth, some changes will occur in our lives, and it might even cost us something. We just received a call from a local Sunday preacher insisting that Sabbath was done away with. So we asked him a question. Isn't it true, sir, that you are promoting the passage of Sunday blue laws which forbid the sale of alcohol on Sunday until midday, so that people are more likely to go to your church on Sunday morning? Well, while he was choking on his answer, another call came through. This was from a local restaurant owner pleading with us not to preach against Sunday worship. Sir, he begged me, I need that church-going crowd to come to my restaurant on Sunday. I need them to come in after church and order that bacon and eggs so I can pay my bills around here. Well, while we were trying to come up with an answer for him, another call came through. This time a waitress employed by the very same restaurant. She was begging us to beg you Sunday goers to leave bigger tips and to talk nice to the waitresses for a change. let's tap the brake. Friends, when we embrace the true seventh-day Sabbath, a lot of things change. Number one, we don't need any blue laws to keep the Sabbath. We do it out of love, joy, and sacred duty. Number two, we don't go to restaurants on Sabbath. And number three, we aim to be courteous to waitresses and leave generous tips all the time. For we who love the truth, I recommend we get back to today's broadcast. Welcome back to our closing segment for installment 2 of The Saints Through the Centuries. This installment is titled, When Saints Entered Babylon, and this segment is entitled, The Saints Are Snared. Yahshua declared that his kingdom is not of this world. If his kingdom was part of this world, his followers would take up arms for it. In this segment, we will discover how so many believers in the Hebrew Messiah were trapped in an old Babylonian system of religious distortions and political upheaval. The history of the early Messianic faith has a break in time described by historian Jesse Lyman Hurlbut in his classic work, The Story of the Christian Church. From the 1933 edition, page 41, he states, "We name the last generation of the first century, from 68 to 100 AD, quote, the age of shadows, partly because the gloom of persecution was over the church, but more especially because of all periods in the history, it is the one about which we know the least. We have no longer the clear light of the book of Acts to guide us, and no author of that age has filled the blank in the history. We would like to read of the later work by such helpers of St. Paul as Timothy, Apollos, and Titus. But all of these and St. Paul's other friends drop out of the record at his death. For 50 years after St. Paul's life, a curtain hangs over the church, through which we strive vainly to look. And when at last it rises, about 100 AD, with the writings of the earliest church fathers, we find a church in many respects very different from that in the days of St. Peter and Paul. In Daniel 7:25, we are warned about a particular agent of evil. Quote, "And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given unto his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time." It is significant that this character first wears out the saints and then thinks to change times and laws. This fellow will prove to be the ruler of Babylon, whoever that happens to be at the time. To understand these and other prophecies, it will be shown that 3 developments in the early Messianic era occurred in parallel. Number 1, there was persecution of the saints, that is, wearing them out. Second, there was growing anti-Jewish sentiment. And 3, there was distortion and erosion of the original faith. This starts the great falling away. Subsequently, many saints will be seduced and or coerced into partnering with Babylon, and the changing of times and laws will thus be normalized. At the launch of the Messianic faith, persecution started quickly with the slaughtering of Stephen in Acts chapter 7, shown there to the right. Persecution and harassment from Jewish players continued even in Rome. Even more so, persecution from Roman authorities is legendary, including the acts of Nero from 54 to 68 AD, Decius from 249 AD, and Diocletian approximately 303 AD. Among those called Christian in the Roman era, their response to Jewish and Roman persecutions differ in a subtle way. Towards both Roman and Jewish persecutors, many Christians prayed for their enemies and even blessed them. Yet, a strain of resentment and anti-Semitism towards Jews emerged among Roman Christians, and this attitude gained ascendancy. Anti-Semitism started gradually and became intense over time. Our first case is Justin Martyr, living from about 100 AD to 165. A hint of anti-Semitism emerges in his dialogue with a Jew named Trypho. Here are some excerpts which downplay Israel's standing. Quote, "For the true spiritual Israel and descendants of Judah, Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham, who in uncircumcision was approved of and blessed by the Almighty on account of his faith, and called the father of many nations, are we who have been led to the Almighty through this crucified Christ. Now, friends, here I emphasize the words claiming, quote, true spiritual Israel are we. Another excerpt from Justin Martyr claims an ugly exclusivity. Quote, as therefore, from the one man Jacob, who is surnamed Israel, all your nation has been called Jacob and Israel, so we from Christ, who begat us unto the Almighty like Jacob and Israel and Judah and Joseph and David, are called and are the true sons of the Almighty, and keep the commandments of Christ. Here, friends, I emphasize the words, we are the true sons. Yet another excerpt from Justin Martyr is particularly unsound. Quote, then is it Jacob, the patriarch in whom the Gentiles and yourselves shall trust? Or is it not Christ? As therefore Christ is the Israel and the Jacob, even so, we who have been quarried out from the belly of Christ are the true Israelitic race. Here, friends, I emphasize the words, we who have been quarried out from the belly of Christ are the true Israelitic race. It is troubling that Justin Martyr has things a bit mixed up. We were not carved out of the belly of the Messiah, rather we are grafted into Israel. In Romans 11, 24-26, Paul is speaking to Gentiles in Rome. Note that, Gentiles in Rome. He states, quote, for if thou wert cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a good olive tree, how much more shall these, which be the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits. That blindness in part is happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. And so all Israel shall be saved. As it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away wickedness from Jacob. Broadcast friends, I emphasize here the words, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits. This is a warning for us Gentiles, not to look down on the Jews. Hippolytus, living from 170 to about 235 AD, takes the error to a new level. In his expository treatise against the Jews, in part 6, speaking to Jews about Jews, he claims, quote, and surely you have been darkened in the eyes of your soul, with a darkness utter and everlasting. For now that the true light has arisen, you wander as in the night, and stumble on places with no roads, and fall headlong, as having forsaken the way that saith, I am the way. Here, my broadcast friends, I emphasize the words, you have been darkened with a darkness utter and everlasting. That is particularly bad. For the record, we at YRM harbor no such sentiments towards the beloved Jews. Let us get that straight. Moving on, John Chrysostom, living from about 347 to 407 AD, was particularly intense in his disdain for Jews. In his homily number 1 against the Jews, part 2, he states, 1. But do not be surprised that I call the Jews pitiable. They really are pitiable and miserable. When so many blessings from heaven came into their hands, they thrust them aside and were at great pains to reject them. 2. But see how thereafter the order was changed about. They became dogs and we became the children. My broadcast friends, I repeat that one. They, the Jews, became dogs, and we became the children. That remark is particularly arrogant. And finally, item 3. If then the Jews failed to know the Father, if they crucified the Son, if they thrust off the help of the Spirit, who should not make bold to declare plainly that the synagogue is a dwelling of demons? God is not worshipped there. Heaven forbid. From now on, it remains a place of idolatry, but still some people pay it honor as a holy place. It is evident that anti-Semitism started gradually and became intense over time. This unmessianic attitude left the early believers vulnerable to deception and the falsehood of, quote, replacement theology, end of quote. Even more, it led to further rejection of the Hebrew roots of the faith. The distortion and erosion of the original faith has several components, and we will review them shortly. But first, these 5 factors were originally covered in part 1 of this broadcast series, Sabbath Keepers Through the Centuries. These 5 factors call for review. A. Loss of apostolic leadership. B. The fall of Jerusalem. C. Emergence of Rome as a religious center. D. Loss of genuine Jewish leadership. E. A cultural tendency in Rome towards veneration of the sun. In addition, we must also consider item F, Emperor Constantine's alarming influence over the faith, and G, the unwarranted change in the religious calendar. Let us first discuss the passing of the apostles. With the apostles dying off, it became easier for heretics and infiltrators to gain a footing. It is written that Israel was faithful to Yahweh as long as Joshua was alive, and the men who immediately succeeded him. We have that precise pattern in early Messianic history. After Joshua and the apostles, the great falling away found its footing. Next, the prophesied fall of Jerusalem had grave consequences. The holy city was the power center for the new faith, sending out missionaries and shepherding the emergence of believers worldwide. The fall of Jerusalem and the fleeing of our Nazarene brethren to Pella created a leadership vacuum from which we never fully recovered. The ascendancy of Rome pulled the worldwide network of congregations closer to a Greco-Roman mindset. After the fall of Jerusalem, the assemblies in the East were largely decentralized. The saints at Rome, with aging apostles, having retired and being martyred there, assumed an increasingly influential role. The loss of genuine Jewish leadership predictably diluted the original faith. Peter, the last of the apostles in Rome, died in Rome around 68 AD. Bishops of Rome installed by the apostles were simply regional leaders. The idea of worldwide plenary authority was never in view for them. Polycarp, the bishop of Smyrna, who is pictured above, came to visit Anicetus, the bishop of Rome, between 155 and 166 AD, to persuade him to observe the original Messianic Passover. By this time, Rome had already gone through 9 non-Jewish bishops since Peter. It is significant that Rome's growing influence was strong enough to warrant such a visit from Polycarp of the East, and we certainly will explore the Passover issue a bit more later. In Roman culture, the tendency to venerate the sun was always there begging on the door. This was covered well in the first installment of our series, Sabbath Keepers Through History. We recapitulate an important citation here from the book Cult of Sol Invictus by Gaston H. Halsbergy, published in 1972 on page 38. He says, in the 2nd century AD, that is 100 AD and beyond, the Eastern sun gods occupied an unchallenged position. Their great power is significantly and officially expressed in the name Sol Invictus, that is, sun unconquerable. We will find veneration of the sun to be a key factor later. Further erosion of the faith was caused by 2 related factors. First, Emperor Constantine's alarming influence over the faith was devastating. Additionally, unwarranted change in the religious calendar was forced upon everyone. To understand these factors, we turn to a noted father of the Roman Church, Epiphanius. First, let's capture some facts about Epiphanius. He lived approximately 310 to 403 AD. He was renowned for his prolific defense of Catholic orthodoxy. And he wrote an impressive treatise called Panarion, meaning medicine chest. It was his intended purpose to provide a remedy to common heresies of his time and he does this by refuting all of them by name. This work inadvertently provides us valuable insights into authentic messianic practices still at play in his era. Let's look closer at a particular section of Epiphanius' Panarion. This section titled Against the Audians. In the Panarion, Epiphanius invests considerable space, describing the Audians whose practices will prove to have an authentic Hebrew roots flavor. More specifically, they commemorate the Last Supper on Passover night, Nisan 14th, just like Yahshua and the apostles instructed. Epiphanius also admits that this was the original practice of the apostles. The Audians also hold an all-night vigil midway through the Passover week. This practice shows that the Audians recognize the first fruits and wave sheaf offerings as pointing to the resurrection and first ascension, while supporting a 3 days and 3 nights timing of the Passion Week. Finally, Epiphanius explains that Emperor Constantine was the one who drove the changes which eliminated the original calendar. Let's look closer at Epiphanius' Panarion against the Audians in section 8.11, starting in paragraph 2. Epiphanius writes, "For they, the Audians, choose to celebrate the Passover with the Jews. That is, they contentiously celebrate the Passover at the same time that the Jews are holding their festival of unleavened bread. And indeed, that this used to be the church's custom, even though they tell churchmen a slanderous thing in this regard, and say, quote, 'You abandoned the Father's Paschal rite in Constantine's time from deference to the emperor and changed the day to suit the emperor.'" Friends, we must at once emphasize the statement, quote, "They celebrate the Passover at the same time that the Jews are holding their festival of unleavened bread." My broadcast friends, if the Jews were keeping the correct calendar back then, celebrating Passover on their dates is a dandy idea. But Epiphanius reveals even more when he says, quote, "And indeed that this used to be the church's custom," end of quote. This is a bombshell admission from a recognized Catholic source that the original practice among Messianics was to do the memorial emblems on Passover the same time as the Jews. Here we emphasize a particular indictment from the Audians. "You abandoned the Father's Paschal rite in Constantine's time from deference to the emperor and changed the day to suit the emperor." Friends, it is hard to escape the chilling impact of this development. Elsewhere in history, researchers on the YRM team discovered the prodding, poking interference of Constantine at the Nicene Council. And here we have confirmation that many in the household of faith resented it, such as the Audians. Epiphanius continues in section 9, paragraph 5 to 6. "And if the Paschal feast were celebrated on the same day each year, and it had been decided to keep it on that day at the council convoked by Constantine, what they say might be plausible. But since the rite cannot be held on the same date each year, their argument is worthless." My broadcast friends, this passage explains what they wanted to achieve when they changed the calendar. They wanted to lock in the events of the Passion Week so that everything happened on the same day of the week in every year the events were celebrated. To be more specific, they wanted Easter to always land on a Sunday. Epiphanius then praises Constantine. He says, "In fact, God accomplished 2 very important things through Constantine, the most beloved of God, and forever the most blessed." So now we have Constantine's standing elevated. He continues, "One of his accomplishments was the gathering of an ecumenical council and the publication of the creed that was issued by Nicaea and confessed by the assembled bishops with their signatures, the deposition of Arius, and the declaration to all of the purity of the faith." Okay, friends, so they rejected Arius and embraced the Trinity. We might address that another day, but there is more. The other was the rectification of the Passover feast for the sake of our unity. In other words, Rome seized control and forced a change in the spring feast in order to promote unity. In section 9, paragraph 7 and 9, Epiphanius explains the calendar debates which flourished and the cause of these disputes. Quote, "For long ago, even from the earliest days, its various celebrations in the church differed, occasioning ridicule every year, with some keeping it a week early and quarreling with the others a week late, some celebrating it in advance, some in between, others afterwards, and in a word, as is not unknown to many scholarly persons, there was a lot of muddle and tiresomeness every time a controversy was aroused in the church's teaching about this festival. As in the time of Polycarp and Victor in the East, was at odds with the West, and they would not accept letters of commendation from each other. This has been the situation ever since the church was thrown into disorder after the time of the circumcised bishops." And there you have it, friends. The loss of the circumcised bishops, that is, the loss of authentic Jewish leadership, was the cause of the disorder. So we have the endorsements of Epiphanius for Constantine's influence. Some other additional historical notes on Constantine are in order. It is well established that he claimed conversion to Christianity in 312 AD, though his actions showed evidence of lingering paganism, such as minting of coins with Sol Invictus on them. His military actions did not end with his conversion, setting the pace for future conquests within Christendom. In 313 AD, he issued the Decree of Milan, which ceased all persecution of Christians. We quote the decree here. "When we, Constantine Augustus and Licinius Augustus, met so happily at Milan, and considered together all that concerned the interest and security of the state, we decided to grant to Christians and to everybody the free power to follow the religion of their choice, in order that all that is divine in the heavens may be favorable and propitious towards all who are placed under our authority." Friends, it is understandable that unsuspecting Roman Christians, worn out from persecution, saw this development as a miracle. But there is more. Next came Constantine's famous decree from March 7, 321 AD, which made Sunday a day of rest. Quote, "On the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in the cities rest, and let all workshops be closed. In the country, however, persons engaged in agriculture may freely and lawfully continue their pursuits, because it often happens that another day is not so suitable for grain sowing or vine planting, lest by neglecting the proper moment for such operations, the bounty of heaven should be lost." My broadcast friends, even though Constantine meant well, he was out of order to make such a proclamation. And finally, in 325 AD, Constantine called the Council of Nicaea and pushed for standardization of Christian belief, especially as regards to the Trinity and the celebration of Easter Sunday. Later, Constantine will split the kingdom into two halves, East and West, and the Roman framework for the faith will be baked in for centuries. And thus a wide and deep array of religious corruptions were folded into a vast, ruthless empire. From this time forward, Rome ran the show, with more improprieties than we can cover here. In short, the church would allow most any pagan religious practice to flourish, as long as the people submitted to Rome. So now we have a shocking and unpredictable fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy. The ruler of Babylon operates not as a man, but as an office occupied perennially. Earlier rulers wore out the saints with persecution. Then along came one ruler claiming to be one of us. He sought to make Yahshua's kingdom his kingdom. He pushed for a distortion of times and laws. And later rulers will seek to wear out the saints in the wilderness. Welcome to Babylon. Welcome to the Great Tribulation. Centuries of doctrinal corruption and ruthless persecution of both Jews and non-compliant Messianics, such as historical Sabbath keepers. Here's a question. What about those times, time and a half in Daniel chapter 7? It sounds like 3.5 years or 42 months or 1,260 days. This is normally interpreted as 1,260 prophetic days, or 1,260 years. In 534 AD, an Eastern Roman emperor, Justinian I, enacted a sweeping set of laws called, quote, the Justinian Code. It cited Christianity as the only allowed religion, and that was a Christianity comprised of Roman and Eastern Orthodox beliefs. With the Pope as the head of all churches, including plenary authority for crushing heresies. But this 534 AD set of enacted laws could not be enforced until the Ostrogoth sees of Rome had been lifted in 538 AD. If one adds 1260 to 538, we come to the year 1798, the year that the papal office was vacated by Pius VI, under siege from French forces. From that time forward, the authority of the Pope was never the same, and certainly unable to authorize persecutions. In those 1,260 years, the saints in the wilderness endured unspeakable persecutions from papal Roman kingdoms. Later, we even find some Christians beating up on each other. More on that in a future broadcast. Today, Babylon continues as a global system of intense international commerce, breathtaking opulence, a never-ending quest for cheapest labor, false religion, and an alarming potential for nuclear annihilation while war rages everywhere. The empire still has Western and Eastern divisions, as seen in the images to the right. And one half of the world is watching the other half starve on the internet. We have focused in this installment on those saints who had been swept into Babylon. For them we join with Yahshua and urge you to come out of her, my people. Please allow me to pause for a personal message. We know many sweet and beautiful people in other religions. We know it's hard to reevaluate the things you believe and practice so dearly. I know what it's like to cherish the Christmas tree, to pray the rosary, and wonder where I left my scapular. And I understand how rewarding those things can feel. From all of us at YRM to all of you, we know very well how hard it is to respond to the call, to leave things like that behind. We also know with absolute certainty that Yahweh has people in all the false religions of the world. We know this because he says, come out of her, my people. Now that we know what went wrong in late antiquity, the restoration message is easier to accept. And we hope to hear from you if you wish to learn more. Now back to the media material. What we studied in this broadcast was the great falling away. But what about other saints through the centuries who avoided all that? In future installments of this series, we will speak about such people. For now, we close with a description of the Waldensians from William Jones' treatise, The History of the Christian Church. We offer 2 citations. Here Jones cites a source culled from his research. Quote, an ancient inquisitor, to whose writings against the Waldensians I had occasion to refer in a former section, thus describes the Waldensians. These heretics are known by their manners and conversation, for they are orderly and modest in their behavior and deportment. They avoid all appearance of pride in their dress. They neither indulge in finery of attire, nor are they remarkable for being mean or ragged. They avoid commerce, that they may be free from deceit and falsehood. They get their livelihood by manual industry, as day laborers or mechanics. And their teachers are weavers or tailors. They are not anxious about amassing riches, but content themselves with the necessities of life. They are chaste, temperate, and sober. They abstain from anger. Even when they work, they either learn or teach. In like manner also, their women are very modest and avoiding backbiting, foolish jesting, and levity of speech, especially abstaining from lies or swearing. And finally, we take another citation from Jones. Quote, Samuel di Concini, a Franciscan friar, speaking of the Waldensian in his Victoria Triumphale, explicitly owns in what respect their faith was incorrigible and vile when he says, quote, that all the errors of these Waldenses consisted in this, that they denied the Church of Rome to be the Holy Mother Church and would not obey her traditions. Friends, we are enormously grateful that you joined us for this challenging installment. Thanks for watching us, and Yahweh be with you. B'Shem Yahshua.
As the sun sets on this installment of The Saints Through the Centuries, we are captivated by the profound impact of these extraordinary figures. These beacons of hope, resilience, and faith have imparted timeless lessons. Join us next time as we continue our odyssey through time, exploring the enduring legacy of these iconic figures. And of course, our host, Michael Midwest Bannock, donned in his signature fedora, will guide us on the next captivating journey. To continue your search for truth, please visit our website, www.yrm.org. Until next time.